rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Antelek Everett.
Here.
Mrs. Gadsden.
Here.
Mrs. Galbo.
Excused.
Mr. Garnett.
Excused.
Mr. Munoz.
Here.
Mrs. Patchen.
Here.
Mr. White.
Here.
Mr. Zoff.
Excused.
Mrs. Thompson.
I'm here. Dr. Walker, did you review the fire exits?
Yes, they're directly in front of me and behind the participants.
I ask that everyone stand for a moment of silence for Mr. Robert Osborne, retired teacher at Beacon High School. Thank you. And would you like to introduce our workshop tonight?
I would. Tonight we have Anne-Marie Corderoni and myself, and we're going to do a budget presentation. And I'm up first, so I'll introduce myself.
Will it be on the screen behind you?
It will be on the screen.
I shall move. Sorry.
It'll take a minute. Just a second. So while we're waiting for the screen to warm up, here it comes. Tonight, my part is to talk a little bit about our philosophy in developing a budget, and to talk about our priority and how we put together the budget. And then Mrs. Corderoni is going to do the rest. So when I say a final look at the budget, this is actually the final piece of the budget. This piece is really looking at staffing, because we've looked at all the departments now, and this is the final piece, but we can take a look at the budget again. So our philosophy is, a little bit earlier this year, we brought to the board some budget assumptions, which we use to develop our budget. And we also, as we were budgeting, we budgeted by priority, and I'll share that with you in just a moment. We will not ask for anything that we don't believe that we need, and we will use, whenever possible, existing staff in new or different roles or services. So, you know, our goal is to maintain staff when we can, but maybe they'll be doing something different than they have done in the past. We have a goal. And our goal is to continuously and proactively improve our systems in order to build the capacity for all students to reach their potential and all staff to have the knowledge and skills to do so in a safe environment. So I want to talk a little bit about we budget by priority. So what is our priority? Taking care of our children is our number one priority, because we are a school district and that's what it is that we do. So here's our goal again, and I want to talk a little bit more about a safe environment and what it is that we mean by a safe environment, because that's actually a very large piece of thinking about the budget. Of course, we want everybody to be physically safe, and that our buildings are safe and we have appropriate safety measures. We also think about being mentally safe and socially safe, and those two have to sometimes do with the climate that we have, and it relates to our culture of care and respect, and emotionally safe as well. And so this budget really, as we budgeted and thought about the different needs of our students, we thought about the whole child and the whole adult. We also would be remiss if we didn't also talk about fiscally safe. And when we talk about being fiscally safe, we're talking about being safe from exposure. For example, lawsuits, or overspending a budget, or not budgeting enough in a certain code. So those are all of the ways that we think about a safe environment as we work on the budget. So let's just talk about school safety a little bit. So we, in this budget that we are presenting, we have budgeted an increase in school safety. This year we worked on an infrastructure, and when I say infrastructure, I mean things like cameras, but also procedures, and we will continue to do that work as we go into the future. This proposed budget is including something a little bit new. We're looking at staffing in our safety program with people who have specialized training that includes communication skills and de-escalation skills for a team approach in the buildings. And we actually have started some training this year with our monitors and with our safety staff in both of these areas. And everybody received a book called Verbal Judo, which is about how to de-escalate people when they're coming at you and they are high in emotion. In addition to that, as you heard from Mr. Mackey, we're talking about an addition of a head bus driver at the transportation department. And you may ask, well, what does that have to do with safety? So I am presenting to you not for you to read, but just to get a visual. This is a huge board down at the bus garage. It's about 6 feet by, I don't know how, it was pretty tall as well. And this is the busing that we do every day here in Beacon. And it looks to me worse than a train schedule. It's hard to imagine, but each of the columns that you see, we do tiered busing because we don't have enough buses to go everywhere we need to go. And as you can see, there's many places that we go every day for not only for our students, for example, going to BOCES, but our special needs students, as well as other students. So it's quite complex. And what does a head bus driver do? Well, they make sure that every kid is on these buses, that needs to be on these buses every day. So as you can see, it's a pretty important job. Again, our goal, and I'd like to focus to the middle of the goal, to build the capacity for all students to reach their potential. We heard from Mr. Mulhern about an addition of a 1.4 special education teachers, and that's to start a new class and with a 0.4 position in another area. We also want to maintain staff, but we may be providing a different service. And here's what I mean by that. As you can see here, we have the net and somebody falling off a ladder. And that's to remind me to say that we need safety nets for students. We are working with a consultant, Judy Lefevre, who is working with us with the idea of lengthening our continuum of services for students, starting in the general education population all the way through special education. And here in Beacon, we do have services for students, but from recent audits that we have done, we believe that we don't have enough service fast enough for students to help them fast enough. So as soon as a student begins to struggle, we want to have something there to help them. And we do that through, of course, RTI, or AIS, that's alphabet soup, but those are programs that help students get help. But also expanding that for different levels of need. And this year we actually had already budgeted a support position in special education, but we haven't used it yet. But it is there. Another part of our goal is to continuously and proactively improve our systems to maintain a safe environment. So one of the things that we've been talking about is designing and developing a human resource department. In the last 2 district audits that have been done prior to my coming, but I have reviewed them, one is probably 6 years old now, and the other is about 2 years old, 2 or 3 years old. In both of those audits, it was recommended to think about developing a human resource department. And I know last year that was a discussion with the board, with Dr. Dorwood as well. The reason for this is that there are so many more laws, rules, and regulations that have that deal with human resource and human resource issues. The APPR alone has made a quagmire of laws and rules and regulations. And as a matter of fact, more and more the Human Resource Department, in terms of laws, is looking more and more like special education. And to have more attention to our human resource tasks would be very helpful. And it's helpful because, for a fiscal reason, to avoid legal and fiscal exposure in certification, all sorts of areas. We also, our goal this year for fiscal safety is really to maintain our fund balance because, as you know, you can only spend your money once. Right now we have a good fund balance, but I think Anne-Marie is going to talk a little bit about past audits and recommendations that have come from past audits. But here's sort of the concept, really, about the fund balance. The fund balance is a school savings account. And just like you would like to have a savings account at home, we would like to have a savings account at school. You never know what's going to happen. A big storm comes along. I was in one district, a big storm came along. A tree fell through the roof of a school. They had to have a new roof. It was something that was not planned. It was not part of the improvement plan because the roof was fairly new, but now they had a big hole in it, and it was quite costly. And if we don't save our money for a rainy day, then the only option we have, if there's something like that, is to go out to the voters and ask for more money. So from our point of view, we want to maintain a fund balance, certainly spend some of it to help bring down the tax levy, but we definitely do not want to give it all away. I could make everybody happy, and I've seen this in districts. So a new superintendent comes in, they see a fund balance, and they say, great, I'm spending the fund balance. I'm going to bring the tax levy down to 0 or almost 0. And you can do that for probably 3 years. But then after that, you have no fund balance left. And when you begin to look at the increases that are needed, it really bankrupts a district. So we've seen it in many districts, and we don't want that to happen here. So that's our philosophy. And now, here's Mrs. Corderoni with the numbers.
Thank you. Good evening. So Dr. Walkley mentioned a couple of things about the budget, and I will talk more about the money and the numbers, and then if you have any questions at the end, we'd be more than happy to answer them. I just want to mention a couple of items that impacted the 15-16 budget in a good way. So usually we start off in not so good way, so this is good. The first was the reduction of the district contribution for teachers' retirement system. Now that rate is set by the state, and the rate reduction was less. As you know, that's all tied, a lot of it, to the stock market and the amount of earnings that they get on the retirement system, and then the rate is set every year. So luckily our rate has decreased. That was a big reduction for our budget this year. And on another positive note, we did get an increase of state aid, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. And you'll also see that we were able to use less reserves and fund balance, which I'll explain a little bit more too. So the 15-16 proposed budget, our budget-to-budget increase is 2.37%, but our tax levy increase is 2.51%, and that is at the tax cap. You'll also be happy to know that the Controller's Office came in and did a budget review. They did their final budget review. This is the last year that we are paying deficit financing, so we've had that for 10 years. We've had budget reviews for 10 years. So they came in and they will be presenting a letter to the board before the next board meeting so that you guys can adopt the budget. And I'll explain a little bit on the next slide. I won't go into great detail, but I'll talk about the tax cap amount, which is 2.51%. And the proposed budget does maintain all the current level of academic programs that Dr. Walkley had mentioned before. So the tax cap, a lot of numbers and a lot of words on here, but basically it talks, this whole calculation needs to be done every year. You'll see the allowable growth factor, which is kind of halfway down the screen. That represents really a 1.62%, not even a 2%, because the word 2% gets kind of thrown around. So there's some things that are plus and minus into this calculation. But you'll notice at the bottom the maximum levy increase for the budget is 2.51%. And then also just to put the tax levy in a little bit of perspective, and we've done this slide before in the last couple of years, but our 5-year average prior to the legislation for the tax cap, we had an average of 3.4%. And you'll see this being the 4th year of the tax cap, those were all the tax cap maximums there, but we're all running between 2.5%. So this slide basically explains how we're going to pay for the proposed budget that we're asking the voters to vote on in May. And again, you'll notice at the bottom the budget to budget at 2.32%, and you'll also notice on top right-hand corner the 2.51%, which would be the levy increase. So probably the most important other things on this slide, and if you look in the 15-16 proposed line, is the reduction that we're using of reserves. So we are not relying on reserves. We're not relying on transfers from debt service, which is money that we've put aside. With the increase in state aid, which is on the second line, for Beacon it was 7.88% from the proposed last year to the proposed this year, which is wonderful. It's 1.9%. I'm sorry, 1.9 million. So we were able to not have to use all of the reserves. So I mentioned the budget review a minute ago, and one of the major components of that, if you've looked over the years, talked about being careful about our reserves and fund balances, not leaning on them so much, trying to maintain them and make sure that, that we have them, make sure that we stay at the 4% fund balance. And we've been able to do that, but it's been much more difficult every year to come up with that. So with the increase in state aid, we're able to actually reduce the amount that we need for reserves and fund balance. The transfer from debt service, we're using a little bit less than we thought we had to before we got the additional state aid. That money sits there, and when it's needed, it gets transferred into the general fund to help pay the principal and interest payments. We're also going to ask the voters in May to vote for a bus proposition. So this is the same one that Mr. Mackey had mentioned in the transportation budget presentation. Actually, I don't know. The total amount is $374,000. $397,500 I think was last year's number. And our transportation state aid is 58.1%. So what does that mean? So we get back 58.1% transportation aid over the next 5 years to pay for a bus proposition. And we've done it a couple different ways. Last year we financed them because we're in good financial condition, and because our reserves are intact and we have fund balance. Our Moody's rating is high enough for us to get a low interest rate, so that actually helps. We were getting, between 1 and 1.5% interest rate. So we're able to actually finance the bus proposition over 5 years, and we can kind of tie it with the state aid, so it would be an offset on the state aid side. There's the bus. So I just want to briefly mention contingency budget. I'll speak about it again in 2 weeks when we do the adoption and then again in the hearing, but I think that people need to understand what happens if we were to fail 2 times on a budget vote. And again, the tax cap law also changed contingency budget. We used to be able to increase contingency budget by an inflation factor. We are no longer able to do that. So if the budget were to fail 2 times and we had to go to contingency budget, we would have a 0% increase. So the slide before basically showed what the levy increase was. So we would have to cut $889,000 from what we're proposing the budget to be. And the kind of things, again, the kind of things that you have to look at. We had to cut all equipment purchases that are not mandatory. The requiring of organizations to pay full costs for the use of facilities, that's a big one. We have a lot of community groups that use our buildings for a reduced rate. If they're not for profit, then they use them for free. They would have to pay fair market value. That would be a big inconvenience for a lot of people. We would have to cut athletic sports, all the things, art and music electives, all the things that we've had to mention in the past when doing the budget development, which we didn't have to do this year. So those are the kind of things that the board would have to look at. And to give a little bit of perspective, again, we always seem to mention this slide, but Beacon ranks 10 of 13th of the total amount we spend per pupil. So the county average is $20,165, and Beacon it comes in at $18,505. And I'll say this today, and I'll keep saying it until May 19th, but the budget vote this year is Tuesday, May 19th from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. And again, we're in the same 2 locations that we have been for the last few years. All City of Beacon residents are at Beacon High School, and Fishkill and Wappinger residents are in Glenham Elementary School. Does the board have any questions?
I just have a couple, Amber.
Okay.
I know that you said that we're getting an approximate reduction with the TRS.
Yes.
Where is that in slide 20? I know you were showing the tax levy, the state and federal aid. Is that in there?
I will show you. Let's see. Okay. So in the $66,250,000, it's built in there. The reduction is built in there. So dollar amount, it amounted about $900,000 different between last year's teacher's retirement and this year's teacher's retirement.
So is that incorporated in the state and the federal aid line, or is that not incorporated into any of the lines, but it's in the total?
It's in the total. This slide actually is a revenue-based slide, and as we get further along, when I actually have, I'll have the budget book available, and you'll see a line that has teachers' retirement, and you'll see last year and this year, and you'll see the difference. This slide, although the budget we're proposing at $66,250,000, this is more the revenue side of how we're going to pay for it. But you will see when I give the board and we put it out on the website, you will see a reduction in that line in teachers' retirement system.
And the other question I had is, did this take into consideration the gap elimination?
Yes, the gap elimination adjustment is built into the $26 million. So see the $1.9 million? Let's say $1.6 million, I remember from today, $1.6 million is the gap elimination adjustment. So we got our gap elimination adjustment for Beacon is only about $300,000 this year. So districts varied all over the state. There was a blog that, some people got a lot more, some people got a lot less. We did receive a little additional foundation aid between about $200,000 as well. So that makes up that $1.9 million extra. So that's all incorporated into the state aid number. That's the total amount that we're going to get.
So that was in the 7.88, that was in the paper, the increase that they said?
Yes. In the paper, what happens is the paper compares what we're actually getting this year versus what we're proposed to get for 15-16. And what I use is what we used as a proposal amount. That's the actual amount for 14-15. We're going to be getting a little bit less state aid, and it has to do with numbers in special ed. Public and private excess cost aid changed a little bit. So that's why the numbers in the paper and the percentages are a little bit higher than what we're presenting to you now.
And I just had a question for you, Dr. Walkley. When you were saying about the HR department and that more attention needs to be to what tasks? Like what for the HR component? I know that the regulations have changed with the APPR and stuff, but did you have anything specific with what we're not meeting with the HR, where HR would be beneficial?
Well, having been in the assistant superintendent position twice before now, there are 2 full-time positions here. Actually, there's about 2.5 full-time positions for the assistant superintendent. And when you begin to look at the initiatives that we have in place for curriculum and staff development, and then the need that we have for attention to certification issues, FMLA, you're going to be finding that we have a huge number of people using FMLA coming up fairly soon. There are other issues that employment issues, etc., personnel issues that we deal with in that department. And it's awfully hard to split your time between two big masters.
Does anybody else have any questions?
I just had a question about the tax reduction reserve. I remember that those are funds from the sale,
Of Old Beacon High School, yes.
and that we only had a number of years to utilize those funds.
Yes, we had 10 years. We did not use it the first year or 2 years, so we do have some time left. This would have been, if we had used the full amount in 15-16, that would have been the final amount. So that would have been
So the 175
we have
is
175.
what's left
Yes.
of those funds.
Yes.
Okay.
A couple of years ago, we decided to do a fourth every year, and that's what we were using. So we still have some time to use it, but we still have 175 left.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion for executive session.
Motion to adjourn to executive session to review the employment history of a particular individual.
Second.